Everyone makes mistakes, and scientists are no exception. Researchers and publications usually have safeguards to prevent shoddy or outright false information from being published. But sometimes, bad science slips through the cracks. In the worst cases, the paper will get retracted, meaning that the journal no longer stands by that paper's conclusions and says that it should not have been published in the first place. And that's a good thing, because it shows us that science is self-correcting. When mistakes happen, someone catches them and we adapt. So let's look back on some of the most regrettable scientific papers of all time and why they were retracted. The first retracted paper on our list is an oldie, but it's had real dangerous staying power. This is the paper that started an international vaccine scare that's still happening decades later. To be clear, vaccines do not cause autism, but some people still think they do. And that claim goes back to one paper published in 1998 and retracted in 2010. Andrew Wakefield, then a doctor at a major London hospital, led a research project looking into the measles, mumps, and rubella, or MMR, vaccine. Wakefield's team published a study claiming that the onset of autism was linked with an unspecified gut disorder, and argued that this disease, and therefore the autism, were caused by the MMR vaccine. The study made headlines and received immediate criticism from the scientific community. One immediate red flag was that his study only looked at 12 children, and all of those children were chosen because their parents already suspected that their vaccinations were what gave those kids autism. The entire reason they were included in a study trying to link autism and the vaccine was the parents' belief that they were connected, which is just horrible logic. The paper also gets a bunch of stuff completely wrong. For instance, when they talk about gut inflammation metrics, they present the normal values for adults, not children. We've barely scratched the surface of all the wrong things in this paper, but despite all these flaws, the idea spread faster than you can say measles outbreak. And the real twist came in 2011, when the British Medical Journal published a 3-part investigation by journalist Brian Deer. In it, Deer presented evidence that Wakefield had been paid to conduct this study by a group of people planning to sue the vaccine makers, but needed a medically justified reason for doing so. That is, of course, a major ethical violation. The 12 children were subjected to all kinds of invasive procedures for research that only existed to make money for a bunch of lawyers. The paper was retracted in 2010. Wakefield lost his medical license, and his conclusions have been disproved time and time again. A study published in 2019 of over 650,000 children showed that the MMR vaccine had absolutely no relationship to the likelihood of developing autism. And for the record, a full course of MMR vaccine is 97% effective against measles, 88% effective against mumps, and 97% effective against rubella. But this story is sadly an example of how hard it can be to correct misinformation once it's out there, and the long-lasting harm that bad science can do. So maybe it's comforting that the next problematic publication isn't life or death. It involves a totally unrealistic and kind of terrifying rat penis. This paper was published on February 13th, 2024, and it lasted 3 whole days before it was retracted. It was a review paper summarizing existing research about a molecular signaling pathway called JAK-STAT that's present in sperm-producing stem cells. The review focused on studies done on rats, which is relevant, I swear. Because JAK-STAT is involved in everything from cancer to autoimmune disease, it's worth knowing about. So what's the problem? It wasn't anything about the text of the paper. It was the images, like this one, that haunts my dreams. Turns out the authors used generative AI to make all of their figures, which is how the world was introduced to Reddit. While it's clear that these atrocious images have no business being in a study on anything other than nightmare fuel, the authors arguably followed the journal's policy. See, while some journals ban AI images, not all of them do. In this case, the journal said that as long as you were honest about using them, generative AI figures weren't forbidden. This brings up a more worrying possibility that other erroneous AI-generated figures might be present in other papers and might fly under the radar if they're more subtle than that one. At least in this case, the errors are clear enough just from looking at this monstrosity, and these figures clearly mean nothing and are too flawed to keep. So, retracted. Rest in peace, We barely knew you. But erroneous images in papers can be sneakier than the with worse consequences. And in this next case, it took 20 years to gather enough evidence to bring down the faked paper. Alzheimer's is the most common form of dementia, and there's been a lot of research into why it happens and how to prevent it. A paper published in 1992 pointed the finger at amyloid beta molecules, which build up in the brain and form plaques around nerve cells. These plaques are made up of lots of amyloid proteins of all different sizes and shapes, but what we don't fully understand is why they happen. These plaques are more common in people with Alzheimer's, but the idea was still pretty controversial, and the evidence connecting the two isn't 100%. So when a 2006 paper identified a specific amyloid molecule that could cause Alzheimer's symptoms in mice, that was a big deal. The authors claimed to have found a new protein called amyloid beta star 56, which was a type of amyloid protein that built up in the brains of mice with Alzheimer's. The authors suggested that this new protein is the reason these clusters build up in the first place. It's like the thing in your shower drain that collects all the hair and makes a nasty, gross clog. And now that researchers had a specific protein to target, they could finally explore how to stop the plaques from forming. Or at least they could try. Because after that 2006 team identified it, for some reason, no one was able to find amyloid beta star 56 again. Fast forward to 2022. A neuroscientist named Matthew Schrag found evidence that the images claiming to show amyloid beta star 56 were heavily manipulated. The images were the result of something called gel electrophoresis, where molecules get separated by size into specific bands. But in this case, it looks like somebody copy-pasted some bands to make it look like these proteins were in the sample when they really weren't. Does that mean the whole amyloid beta hypothesis is debunked? Well, experts are still divided, but it sure doesn't look good. The 2006 paper was retracted in 2024 with the agreement of all of the co-authors except for one. But this was only after it was cited almost 2,500 times, meaning its impact on Alzheimer's research has been truly massive. How the field will recover remains to be seen. But hopefully with this one fraudulent paper gone, the future of Alzheimer's research will be a lot clearer. We've got more terrible research for you right after this ad break.
This SciShow video is supported by sendacake.com, the unique gifting experience for every occasion. Sendacake sent us a sweet flower shower box that plays music and shoots confetti automatically when you open it. A stream of flower confetti bills rains down on you, and then you get to eat a mini strawberry shortcake. What more could you want? I mean, other than to relive that experience over and over again, and since these boxes can actually be reloaded and reused, you can relive that magic moment. If you know a mom anywhere in the US, you can send them this memorable Mother's Day gift for 10% off using the code SciShow at sendacake.com.
The bigger they are, the harder they fall. That's true for this next one, which is the story of a researcher with not one, but 18 retractions. We're talking about Brian Wansink, former head of the Food and Brand Lab at Cornell University. He published dozens of papers about how to use psychology to change how people eat. You've probably heard of some of these ideas, like if you've ever been told not to shop hungry because you'll buy more junk food, that's because of him. But that paper was retracted, so feel free to forget that advice. The empire-tumbling debunk started in 2016, when Brian Wansink wrote a blog post. While we've all probably posted some things we regret, this particular blog post really takes the cake. He was trying to give helpful advice to graduate students about the tenacity and hard work it takes to get published in academia these days. But what a lot of people noticed was that his recommendations were essentially just do bad statistics. See, Wansink's lab would run their experiments and gather as much data as they possibly could, even if it wasn't relevant to the study at hand. So let's say they were in a restaurant collecting data to see if eating is affected by, like, napkin color or something. They'd also take down lots of other details, like how many people were in each group, what they were drinking, their location in the restaurant, and more. In his blog post, Wansink recommended taking all of that data and reanalyzing it, even if it turned out to be a totally different question than the original experiment set out to examine. So if their results showed that the napkin color is insignificant, but the location in the restaurant is, well, you've got a paper, baby. Dice up the data, rerun the numbers, mix and match and saute and flambe until the computer spits out a statistically significant result. But while he presented this as a research life hack, it's already been around for a while. It's called p-hacking, and it is a big no-no in science and statistics. Here's the thing about statistics. There's always a margin of error. In fact, that's essentially what a p-value is. In these analyses, you're trying to see if your observed data can disprove a null hypothesis. In the napkin experiment, the null would be that napkins have nothing to do with eating choices. So let's say I crunch the numbers and I get a p-value for the correlation between napkins and food choice of p equals 0.45. That means there's a 45% chance that my data are consistent with the null, and in academic research, that means it's not a statistically significant result. But if I swap table location for napkins, I might get a p-value of 0.05, which most people would call statistically significant. But remember that means the chances of the null explaining the data sets are 5%, which isn't nothing. The more tests you do, the more likely it is you'll get a false positive. Readers of Wansing's blog quickly pointed out these shady practices in the comments, which led people to dig even further into his research methods. Aside from the p-hacking, they found inconsistencies in his data sets across multiple papers, among other issues. While Wansing denies there was any fraud, he did step down from his position at Cornell and retired in 2019, after 6 of his papers were retracted in one day. So in the end, he got his just desserts. Our next example is actually a great example of how a field can change their conduct in response to super big challenges. In case that pun wasn't abundantly clear, we're talking about superconductors. A conductor is a material that electricity easily flows through. Electricity moves more easily through some materials than others, which is why we make wires out of copper and not, like, wood. The holy grail in materials research right now is a superconductor, something with zero resistance. And even better would be one that worked at room temperature. This could enable improvements in everything from maglev trains to batteries, and could even lead to magnet-powered nuclear fusion and quantum computers. So far, we've only been able to create superconductors either at low temperatures or high pressures, like millions of times higher than the atmospheric pressure. But in 2023, a research team claimed to have made superconducting materials at room temperature. They claimed that they made nitrogen-doped lutetium hydride, which means they added nitrogen impurities to this crystal of lutetium and hydrogen to make it better at carrying a charge. Their data showed that the material was acting like a superconductor at about 21 degrees Celsius and just under 10,000 atmospheres of pressure, which is still a lot, but it's way better than the millions of atmospheres it used to take. But in 2023, the paper was retracted after an investigation revealed that the lab fabricated data, falsified the results, and committed full-on plagiarism. And here's the happy ending. In 2024, physicists held an entire conference just to discuss retractions in superconductor research and how to prevent more problematic work. Physicists and folks from research journals gathered and brainstormed some possible guidelines to make sure research is reproducible. That's exactly what it means for science to be self-correcting, and I think that's pretty super. And we can't leave out these social sciences. One huge question in the world of political science is how you can change people's minds about divisive political issues. A 2014 paper by graduate researcher Michael LaCour and his advisor, Donald Green, no relation, set out to provide some answers. They wanted to know if door-to-door canvassing could convince people to change their views on gay rights. Both gay and straight canvassers held 20-minute conversations with strangers in Los Angeles County to try to get their support for gay marriage. According to the paper, the researchers conducted follow-up surveys 3 weeks, 6 weeks, and 9 weeks after the strangers' first conversation with the canvassers. They concluded that only the gay canvassers were able to convince people to change their their minds and support gay marriage, even in the long term. This was a big result, and the paper was published in Science. Naturally, some other graduate students wanted to do a follow-up study to expand the research, so they asked the original authors for some guidance. And as they started digging deeper, things got fishy. The survey company that LaCour said he worked with didn't recognize him and didn't have the ability to do the follow-up surveys he claimed to have run. This led our grad student sleuths to suspect that the initial study lifted their long-term results from something called the Cooperative Campaign Analysis Project, which used nearly identical metrics in a national population. So they brought their suspicions to Donald Green. And when Green asked LaCour for his original data, LaCour said he had accidentally deleted it all. Believing this was a lie, Green wrote to Science to ask for a retraction. But that's not the end of the story. Those intrepid grad student researchers ended up running their own version of the study. This time, they directed canvassers to talk to people in South Florida about transgender rights and transphobia. Like the original study design, some of the canvassers were transgender and some were cisgender. But this time, they really did do all their follow-up surveys. They found that both transgender and cisgender canvassers could reduce transphobia through those conversations, and the effect persisted long after that conversation. So even though the original study was faked, the real follow-up study showed something more hopeful, that anyone can help share information and change minds through productive conversations, even with strangers. It's tough to look back and see the harm that some of these papers have done and the silliness that occasionally gets through peer review. But these papers were retracted, which means the system is working. The bad science gets called out and cleared away, and that makes room for all sorts of fantastic new research that can bring us forward. But let's try to avoid any images of giant rat penises in the future, okay?